Some phone calls don't wake you up. They change the course of your life forever. At exactly 3 a.m., the private phone on Ethan Romano's nightstand rang once, cutting through the silence that surrounded his secluded estate outside Chicago. Almost no one possessed that number. The handful of people who did understood one rule that had never been spoken because it never had to be. If they called after midnight, it had better be because the world was falling apart. Ethan opened his eyes before the second ring. Years of responsibility had trained him to wake instantly, his mind clear long before his body caught up. He reached for the phone without turning on the lamp. Romano! For a moment, there was only quiet breathing on the other end. Then came a voice so soft it barely sounded real. Mr. Romano, it's Olivia. Ethan sat upright. Olivia Carter had served as his executive secretary for almost 4 years. She organized impossible schedules, remembered every detail before anyone else noticed it, and had somehow become the one person inside his company who never seemed intimidated by power. She never called outside office hours. She certainly never called at 3 in the morning. What happened? He asked, his voice steady. Another pause followed. He could hear distant echoes, metallic doors opening somewhere far behind her, footsteps crossing polished concrete, voices too muffled to understand. I'm at the county jail, she whispered. I know how this sounds. Ethan frowned. The words made no sense together. Olivia Carter. Jail. It was like hearing rain had fallen upward or the sun had risen in the west. Were you hurt? He asked. No. Did you do something? Silence answered him again, longer this time. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a calmness that felt stranger than panic. Please don't believe what you're going to hear in the morning. Ethan looked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark lake beyond his property. Somewhere in the distance, lightning flashed behind thick summer clouds, illuminating the water for only a heartbeat before everything disappeared into darkness again. Olivia, he said quietly, tell me where you are. She gave him the name of the facility. He memorized it instantly. I'm sorry I called, she said. I didn't know who else to trust. Ethan closed his eyes for one brief second. During 4 years of working together, Olivia had never once asked him for a personal favor. She had never used his influence, never mentioned her private struggles, never crossed the invisible line between employer and employee. Yet tonight, from behind locked doors, she had asked for him. Not a lawyer, not a relative. Him. Stay where you are, Ethan replied. I have to, she answered with the faintest trace of weary humor. The line went silent before disconnecting. Ethan remained seated, the phone still in his hand. Outside, the wind pressed gently against the glass. Inside, the mansion felt unusually empty. Without another thought, he stood, reached for his coat instead of calling security, picked up his car keys himself, and walked toward the front door. By sunrise, the entire city would believe Olivia Carter had become a criminal. Ethan Romano intended to learn the truth before anyone else had the chance to write her story for her. The roads were nearly empty as Ethan Romano drove through downtown Chicago without his usual convoy. Streetlights reflected across the windshield, while the city slept beneath a blanket of humid summer air. He ignored 3 incoming calls from his head of security and another from his chief of staff. By now, everyone inside his organization had probably noticed that his vehicle had left the estate without escort, something that had never happened before. Yet none of that occupied his mind. The only question repeating itself was painfully simple. What could possibly have happened to Olivia? 20 minutes later, he parked across from the county jail. The building stood under harsh white floodlights, plain and unremarkable, the kind of place thousands of people passed every day without a second glance. Ethan walked through the front entrance alone, drawing curious looks from the overnight staff. Even dressed in a simple charcoal jacket and dark jeans, his quiet confidence filled the room before he spoke a single word. A middle-aged desk officer looked up from his paperwork. Can I help you, sir? Ethan placed a business card on the counter. I am here to see Olivia Carter. The officer glanced at the name before his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. He disappeared into a nearby office, returning several minutes later with a supervisor whose polite smile seemed carefully practiced. "Mr. Romano," the supervisor said, "Miss Carter requested that only you be allowed to visit if you came." Ethan gave a slight nod but did not respond. He was escorted through a series of secure doors until he reached a small interview room containing nothing more than a metal table and 2 chairs. The room was spotless, quiet, and strangely cold. A minute later, the door opened again. Olivia stepped inside wearing the standard gray clothing provided by the facility. Her neatly tied curls had loosened slightly, and there were dark circles beneath her eyes, but she stood with the same composed posture she carried every morning into the executive office. She looked exhausted, not defeated. When their eyes met, she managed a faint smile that disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. "I am sorry you had to come," she said softly. Ethan remained standing. "Sit down." She obeyed without argument. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The silence carried years of mutual trust that suddenly felt fragile under the weight of unanswered questions. Finally, Ethan took the seat across from her. "Tell me exactly what happened." Olivia lowered her gaze to her folded hands. "Yesterday evening, I stopped at a neighborhood pharmacy on my way home. I was buying medicine for my mother." She inhaled slowly before continuing. "Before I reached the checkout counter, 2 officers entered the store. They asked for my identification. They searched my bag. Then they told me I was under arrest." Ethan watched every movement of her face. She was not searching for excuses or carefully choosing words to protect herself. She was simply telling the story exactly as she remembered it. "What was the charge?" he asked. Olivia looked back at him, and for the first time since entering the room, uncertainty replaced composure. "They said evidence connected me to financial fraud involving one of your companies." The words settled heavily between them. Ethan did not react immediately because they contradicted everything he knew. Olivia had reviewed thousands of confidential documents over 4 years. She had access to information worth millions of dollars every single day, yet she had never taken advantage of a single opportunity. As the silence stretched, Olivia spoke again, almost in a whisper. "I did not call because I expected you to rescue me. I called because by 8 o'clock this morning, the entire city will believe I betrayed you, and I could not bear the thought of you believing it too." For the first time since she had begun working for him, Ethan Romano interrupted Olivia before she could explain another detail. "Look at me." She slowly raised her eyes. "Do you expect me to believe you did this?" She answered immediately, "No." The response caught him by surprise. "I expect you to look at the evidence before you decide." Ethan studied her face in complete silence. During 4 years together, Olivia had built a reputation that no report could erase overnight. She remembered birthdays of employees no one else noticed. She stayed late whenever a project demanded it without asking for recognition. She corrected mistakes before they reached his desk and quietly accepted blame when others tried to shift responsibility. More than once she had reminded him to call business partners whose names even senior executives had forgotten. She had earned trust one ordinary day at a time, never through dramatic gestures but through relentless consistency. That was why the accusation felt impossible. Ethan stood and walked toward the narrow window in the interview room. Dawn was still an hour away, but the eastern sky had begun to lose its darkness. Behind him, Olivia remained perfectly still. She knew him well enough to understand that silence never meant indecision. It meant he was connecting facts that nobody else had noticed. Finally, he turned back toward her. "Who investigated this case?" Olivia quietly mentioned the name of the detective assigned to the file and the federal task force that had assisted. Ethan recognized both immediately. Neither had a reputation for carelessness. If they had approved an arrest, they believed they had convincing evidence. That made the situation even more troubling. "Did they show you anything?" he asked. Olivia nodded. "Bank transfers, internal company files, electronic records with my employee credentials attached to them." Ethan frowned. "And every document appeared genuine." Those 4 words lingered in the cold room like a heavy fog. Genuine evidence. Genuine records. genuine access. Everything pointed toward one conclusion, yet the woman sitting across from him remained the least likely person he had ever suspected of betrayal. "There is something else," Olivia said quietly. Ethan waited. "One investigator asked me the same question 6 different ways." She paused before repeating it exactly as she remembered. "Why would someone as loyal as you suddenly turn against Ethan Romano?" Ethan's expression hardened, not with anger but with curiosity. That question revealed something important. They had already accepted that Olivia had always been loyal. They were not trying to discover whether she could betray him. They were trying to explain why she supposedly had. That meant even the investigators recognized the contradiction. Ethan reached into his jacket and removed his phone. Several missed calls covered the screen along with dozens of unread messages. News alerts had already begun appearing across local media outlets. Anonymous sources claimed that a trusted executive assistant connected to Romano Enterprises had been arrested during a financial investigation. Her name had not yet been released, but it would not remain hidden for long. Ethan slipped the phone back into his pocket without opening a single article. He looked directly at Olivia. "Listen carefully." She straightened instinctively. "From this moment forward, you will not worry about public opinion. You will not try to defend yourself to reporters, investigators, or anyone else until we know exactly who built this case against you." Olivia searched his face, almost afraid to believe what she was hearing. Ethan's voice remained calm, steady, and unmistakably certain. "Someone spent a great deal of time making the evidence look real. People do not work that hard unless they are hiding something much bigger. And when I find out what that is, the truth will speak louder than every headline waiting for sunrise." When Ethan Romano walked out of the county jail, the first light of dawn was spreading across the Chicago skyline. His driver was waiting beside the car, but Ethan shook his head and took the keys himself. During the 20-minute drive back into the city, he ignored every message flashing across his phone. Reporters were already asking questions. Senior executives were demanding emergency meetings. Investors wanted statements. None of that mattered yet. Facts came before headlines. Instead of driving to his headquarters, Ethan turned onto a quiet residential street on the south side of the city. He had memorized Olivia Carter's address years ago for employment records but had never visited. She had always drawn a clear line between work and her private life, and he had respected it. The brick apartment building was nearly 70 years old, its faded entrance framed by flower pots that had been carefully watered despite their age. Nothing about the neighborhood reflected the polished glass towers where Olivia spent her weekdays coordinating multimillion-dollar schedules. Ethan climbed 2 flights of narrow stairs until he reached apartment 2B. He did not knock. He simply stood outside for a long moment, noticing a pair of worn walking shoes beside the door and a small handwritten note reminding someone to take morning medication with breakfast. An elderly woman opened the door before he could press the bell. Her silver hair was neatly tied back, and although fatigue showed in her eyes, she greeted him with gentle courtesy. "May I help you?" she asked. Ethan introduced himself. The woman's expression changed immediately. "You are Olivia's boss." It was not a question. She stepped aside and quietly invited him in. The apartment was modest but spotless. Every piece of furniture had clearly been repaired more than once instead of replaced. Family photographs covered one wall, showing birthdays, graduations, and ordinary moments that money could never buy. On the dining table sat neatly organized folders labeled medical bills, insurance, utilities, and college tuition. None of them had been hidden. None of them suggested extravagance. Everything reflected careful discipline. "Olivia does not know I came," Ethan said softly. Her mother smiled with quiet pride. "She would probably be embarrassed." Ethan looked around the room. "She never talks about any of this." "She does not want sympathy," her mother replied. "She believes people should be judged by how well they do their work, not by the burdens they carry home." Before Ethan could answer, another bedroom door opened. A young man wearing a university sweatshirt stepped into the hallway, textbooks tucked beneath one arm. He froze when he recognized the visitor. Mr. Romano? Ethan nodded. You must be Daniel. The young man smiled awkwardly. Olivia paid my tuition again last week. I told her I could take fewer classes and work more hours, but she refused. She said graduating on time would save money in the long run. Ethan glanced back toward the folders on the table. Suddenly, countless moments from the office began fitting together in ways he had never considered. The reason Olivia skipped expensive business dinners. The reason she never took vacations. The reason she quietly accepted extra projects every holiday season. None of it had been ambition. It had been responsibility. As Ethan prepared to leave, Olivia's mother walked him to the door. Whatever people are saying today, she said with complete certainty. My daughter would rather lose everything than betray someone's trust. Ethan remained silent for several seconds before giving a respectful nod. Walking back toward his car, he realized something that unsettled him more than any accusation. After 4 years of working side by side, he had known Olivia's efficiency, her professionalism, and her loyalty. But he had never truly known the life that had quietly shaped every one of those qualities. And somehow, he felt that hidden life contained the first real clue to everything that had happened. By mid-morning, Romano Enterprises had become the center of every business broadcast in Chicago. Television screens repeated the same speculation. Financial commentators questioned internal security. Anonymous sources hinted that a trusted employee had secretly manipulated company records for months. Ethan Romano listened to none of it. He closed the conference room doors, dismissed everyone except his chief technology officer, and placed a single folder on the polished walnut table. Show me every login connected to Olivia Carter during the last 90 days, he said. The room fell silent except for the sound of keyboards. Within minutes, dozens of digital records appeared across the large display. Every file carried Olivia's employee credentials. Every authorization looked authentic. Every timestamp matched normal business hours. At first glance, the evidence appeared flawless. Yet Ethan noticed something no one else seemed to question. Olivia always arrived at the office before 7:30 every morning. She reviewed correspondence herself before opening confidential files. It was a habit she had followed every workday for 4 years. The activity log from the investigation showed something different. Several sensitive documents had supposedly been opened precisely at 8 o'clock on consecutive Mondays. Perfectly on the hour. Perfectly identical. Olivia had never worked like a machine. She worked like a careful human being. Zoom in, Ethan said quietly. The technology officer enlarged the records. Ethan stared at the screen for several long seconds before asking another question. Can these timestamps be duplicated? The officer hesitated. Under normal circumstances, no. But with sophisticated access, someone could replicate user credentials, mirror login behavior, and generate activity that appears completely legitimate. Ethan folded his arms. Without the employee knowing? Yes. The answer hung heavily in the room. At that exact moment, another executive entered carrying a sealed envelope that had arrived by courier less than an hour earlier. There was no return address. Inside rested a single flash drive and one typed sentence. Stop looking for the truth if you want your company to survive. No signature. No demand. Only a warning. Ethan inserted the drive into an isolated computer disconnected from the company network. A security recording appeared on the screen. The date matched the evening before Olivia's arrest. It showed the executive parking garage beneath headquarters. Employees walked toward their cars as usual until Olivia entered the frame carrying her laptop bag. She stopped beside the elevator to answer her phone. Seconds later, another woman wearing the same height, the same hairstyle, the same dark business suit, and even the same leather handbag stepped into view from another corridor. The resemblance was remarkable. The second woman kept her face lowered beneath the brim of a baseball cap before disappearing into a restricted hallway that required executive access. Ethan replayed the recording twice, then 3 times. Olivia had remained by the elevator the entire time. The other woman had entered the secure section using credentials that investigators now believed belonged to Olivia. Whoever planned this operation had not relied upon forged documents alone. They had studied Olivia's routines, copied her appearance, duplicated her digital identity, and expected everyone to accept the evidence without asking one simple question. What if the person they arrested had been chosen long before any crime was reported? Ethan slowly removed the flash drive and looked toward the city skyline beyond the conference room windows. This was no longer an internal investigation. Someone had invested months preparing a deception detailed enough to fool experienced investigators, advanced security systems, and nearly everyone who knew Olivia Carter. Almost everyone. Because one person had spent 4 years watching the real Olivia solve problems with quiet honesty every single day. And the more convincing the evidence became, the more certain Ethan grew that someone was desperately trying to hide the truth behind it. The anonymous flash drive remained on Ethan Romano's desk long after everyone else had left the conference room. Outside, the city moved through another ordinary afternoon, but inside his office every unanswered question seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute. He replayed the parking garage recording again, slowing every frame until even the smallest movements became visible. The woman disguised as Olivia never looked toward the security cameras. She walked with confidence, as though she already knew exactly where every camera was positioned. That detail disturbed Ethan more than the disguise itself. Whoever planned this operation had studied his company from the inside. Before he could examine another frame, a quiet knock came from the door. His chief of security stepped inside carrying a thin archive box that had been recovered from the company's storage room. "You asked for every internal report Olivia ever submitted outside her normal duties," he said. Ethan opened the box. Most of the folders contained routine administrative notes, but one sealed envelope immediately caught his attention. It had never been entered into the company's digital records. Across the front, written in Olivia's careful handwriting, were only 6 words. "For Mr. Romano, if necessary." Ethan opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a short memorandum dated almost 18 months earlier. Olivia explained that while organizing executive travel schedules, she had discovered unusual calendar requests that repeatedly attempted to place Ethan in predictable public locations without sufficient security preparation. She had quietly canceled those requests after confirming they had been submitted through unauthorized channels. Rather than creating panic, she had documented every detail, strengthened verification procedures, and monitored future requests herself. At the bottom of the page, she had written one final sentence. "I chose not to mention this because protecting your schedule was more important than receiving credit for fixing it." Ethan remained perfectly still. He remembered those calendar conflicts. At the time, he had assumed they were harmless administrative mistakes. He had thanked no one because he had never known someone had already solved the problem before it reached his desk. The chief of security looked over the document with growing disbelief. "She never reported this to anyone?" Ethan slowly shook his head. "She handled it alone." Another folder revealed a similar pattern. Olivia had quietly questioned irregular vendor invoices, prevented confidential files from being sent to incorrect recipients, and corrected accounting discrepancies before they affected company audits. Each report ended the same way. Issue resolved. No further action required. No request for recognition. No complaint. No mention during performance reviews. She had protected the company so consistently that many of her most important decisions had become invisible simply because nothing bad had happened afterward. Ethan leaned back in his chair as dozens of ordinary memories suddenly took on new meaning. Every time Olivia had calmly suggested changing a meeting room, delaying a delivery, or confirming an unfamiliar request twice, he had assumed she was simply thorough. Now he realized she had been quietly standing between his company and problems no one else had even noticed. Then one final page slipped from the bottom of the envelope. Unlike the others, it had never been completed. Only a few handwritten lines appeared across the top. "Someone inside the executive division is collecting information that does not belong to them. I need more proof before I bring this to Mr. Romano." The sentence ended there. The rest of the page remained blank. Ethan stared at those unfinished words until the room fell completely silent. Olivia had not become the target because she was weak. She had become the target because she had seen something she was never supposed to discover. And suddenly the entire investigation looked very different. The evidence had never been created to expose a criminal. It had been created to silence the one employee whose quiet honesty had come dangerously close to uncovering the truth. By the following morning, Ethan Romano no longer viewed the investigation as a question of whether Olivia Carter was innocent. That answer had already settled in his mind. The only question that remained was how many people had been manipulated into believing a carefully manufactured lie. He requested a private meeting with the lead investigator assigned to the case. The conference room inside the federal building was quiet, its walls lined with neatly framed certificates and shelves of legal reference books. The investigator arrived carrying several thick case files and placed them confidently on the table. "The evidence against Miss Carter is extensive," he began. Ethan listened without interruption as transaction records, security reports, and digital activity logs were presented one after another. Every document appeared polished. Every conclusion seemed reasonable. When the presentation ended, Ethan asked only one question. Did anyone verify whether Olivia Carter was physically present every time her credentials were used? The investigator paused. The electronic records confirmed access. "That was not my question," Ethan replied calmly. "Did anyone verify that she was actually standing where those records claim she was?" Silence settled over the room. The investigator slowly reopened the files, searching through page after page before finally admitting, "No. We relied on authenticated system logs." Ethan removed the anonymous flash drive from his briefcase and played the security recording from the executive parking garage. The disguised woman appeared on the screen exactly as before. Nobody spoke until the recording ended. Then Ethan placed Olivia's handwritten reports beside it. "For 18 months, she quietly prevented security failures inside my company. She documented suspicious activity before any investigation existed. She protected my organization without asking for recognition. Does that sound like someone preparing to betray it?" The investigator carefully read every page. His confident expression gradually disappeared. One of the analysts standing nearby requested access to the original surveillance files instead of the edited copies included in the investigation. Within an hour, technicians discovered something everyone had overlooked. Several security recordings had been replaced before the official evidence package had been assembled. The alterations were subtle enough to escape routine review but significant enough to reshape the timeline surrounding Olivia's movements. More requests followed. Building access logs were compared with elevator sensors, parking records, and maintenance reports. Piece by piece, the perfectly constructed story began to fracture. By late afternoon, another discovery changed everything. An executive access card reported as inactive had quietly entered restricted company areas on multiple occasions during the previous 6 months. The card belonged to a former contractor whose credentials should have been permanently disabled long before the investigation began. Suddenly, every unexplained document transfer, every duplicated login, and every suspicious calendar request pointed toward a coordinated operation that had existed long before Olivia's arrest. The lead investigator slowly closed the final file and looked directly at Ethan. "We owe Miss Carter an apology." Ethan remained composed, but relief quietly replaced the weight he had carried since the early morning phone call. "An apology is a beginning," he answered. "The truth is what she deserves." As he left the building, his phone vibrated with a single message from the prosecutor's office. After reviewing newly verified evidence, they had requested an immediate hearing to reconsider Olivia's detention. Ethan looked toward the courthouse standing beneath the bright afternoon sky. Less than 48 hours earlier, the world had rushed to decide who Olivia Carter was. Now that same world was finally being forced to ask a far more important question. Who had worked so hard to make an innocent woman appear guilty, and what had they been trying to protect all along? The hearing lasted less than 30 minutes, but to Olivia Carter it felt as though an entire lifetime had been compressed into a single morning. She sat quietly while attorneys reviewed the newly verified evidence, corrected timelines, and explained how critical security records had been altered before reaching investigators. No dramatic speeches were necessary. The facts were finally speaking for themselves. When the judge announced that the charges were being dismissed pending the continuing investigation, the courtroom remained unusually still. Olivia closed her eyes for one brief moment, not because she wanted to celebrate, but because the weight she had carried since the previous evening had finally begun to lift. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered behind temporary barriers, cameras pointed toward the front entrance, waiting for a statement that would become the next headline. Olivia hesitated just inside the doors. She had no desire to stand before microphones or answer questions from people who had already decided who she was less than 2 days earlier. Then she noticed a familiar black sedan parked quietly across the street. There were no flashing lights, no security convoy stretching around the block, and no group of assistants opening doors before Ethan Romano stepped out. For perhaps the first time in years, he had arrived alone. As Olivia walked down the courthouse steps, conversations around her gradually faded. Ethan crossed the sidewalk at an unhurried pace until he stood in front of her. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence between them carried something different now. It was no longer filled with uncertainty. It was filled with understanding. Ethan opened the passenger door himself. "Come home," he said softly. Olivia smiled with quiet gratitude. "I thought you would be busy fixing everything this has caused." Ethan looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Some things matter more than board meetings." She settled into the passenger seat, and they drove through the city without saying much. The skyline reflected across the windows while ordinary life continued around them. Families crossed intersections. Students hurried between buildings. Delivery trucks stopped at neighborhood stores. It amazed Olivia how normal the world looked after her own had nearly fallen apart. Halfway through the drive, Ethan finally broke the silence. "I read every report you wrote." Olivia turned toward him, surprised. "The ones you never submitted." She lowered her eyes with quiet embarrassment. "I only did what needed to be done." "Exactly," Ethan replied. "You solved problems before anyone else knew they existed, and you never expected anyone to notice." Olivia looked out the window again. "That was my job." Ethan shook his head gently. "No, that was your character." Those words stayed with her for the rest of the drive. When they reached her apartment building, Ethan parked instead of leaving immediately. He stepped out first and walked to the passenger side, opening the door with the same calm respect he would have shown any honored guest. Olivia's mother and younger brother were already waiting outside after hearing the news. Tears filled her mother's eyes as she embraced her daughter, while Daniel stood smiling with visible relief. Ethan remained respectfully several steps away, allowing the family their moment together. Olivia eventually turned back toward him. "Thank you for believing me," Ethan answered with complete honesty. "I did not believe you because you worked for me. I believed you because every ordinary day for 4 years proved who you were long before anyone accused you of being someone else." In that quiet neighborhood, beneath the warm afternoon sun, Olivia realized that the greatest gift Ethan had given her was not her freedom. It was the certainty that genuine integrity could still be recognized, even when the entire world had chosen to doubt it. 3 weeks later, the elevators inside Romano Enterprises opened onto the executive floor with their familiar quiet hum. Yet something about the building had changed. Employees who once hurried through the hallways now paused to greet one another. Conversations carried a little more patience. Even the reception desk displayed fresh flowers that had not been there before. Small changes, almost invisible to visitors, but impossible to miss for those who worked there every day. Olivia Carter stepped through the glass entrance wearing the same professional navy suit she had always preferred, carrying the same leather portfolio that had accompanied her through countless meetings. There was no dramatic announcement of her return. She had never wanted one. Yet as she walked toward her desk, people slowly stood from their workstations one after another. No one had been instructed to do so. No memo had been sent. They simply rose in quiet respect. Some smiled. Others nodded. A few whispered, "Welcome back." Olivia paused, overwhelmed by a kindness she had never expected. She thanked each person with the same gentle smile that had carried her through every ordinary workday before her life had suddenly changed. Moments later, Ethan Romano stepped out of his office. The conversation stopped instantly, not from fear, but from respect. He looked around the room before resting his eyes on Olivia. "Conference room," he said calmly. Within minutes, senior executives, department directors, and managers gathered around the long walnut table where so many important decisions had been made. Ethan remained standing at the head of the room while Olivia quietly took her usual seat near the end, exactly where she had always worked. He allowed the silence to settle before speaking. Several weeks ago, many people believed a story because it was easy to believe. Very few people stopped to ask whether it was true. No one interrupted. An investigation cleared Olivia Carter completely. But clearing someone's name is not the same as restoring their dignity. That responsibility belongs to all of us. His words were measured, never raised, yet every sentence carried unmistakable weight. He continued, "For 4 years, Olivia protected this company in ways most of us never noticed because she solved problems before they reached our desks. She never asked for recognition. She never demanded praise. She simply did the right thing, again and again." Ethan reached into a folder and removed a new employee identification badge along with a small set of office keys. Walking around the table himself, he stopped beside Olivia and placed both items gently in front of her. Effective today, Olivia Carter will serve as Executive Director of Strategic Operations. Every department will have direct access to her office, and every major security decision will require her review. A quiet wave of surprise moved through the room, followed almost immediately by sincere applause. Olivia looked up, visibly moved. "I do not know if I deserve this," she said softly. Ethan answered with the same calm certainty that had guided him since the night of her phone call. "You earned it long before anyone realized it." The room fell silent once more. As employees slowly returned to their work, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, filling the executive floor with a warm golden glow. Olivia sat at her desk, not as someone transformed by power, but as the same woman whose character had never changed even when her circumstances had. Ethan paused outside his office for one final glance across the room before quietly closing the door. In a world where appearances could be manufactured and reputations could be questioned overnight, one truth had endured every test. Real integrity leaves a trail that deception can never erase. And on that ordinary morning in Chicago, everyone who witnessed Olivia Carter return to work remembered what dignity truly looks like.